and welcome back to Cinematic Sarcastic, podcast that talks all things movies and television. I'm Natalie, and I'm your host. On today's episode, we are going to talk about The Gorge. This is a new action romance film. I think it just dropped yesterday on Apple TV, if I am not mistaken. This one stars Miles Teller, Anya Taylor-Joy, and Sigourney Weaver. Now, for anyone who is not familiar with this film, I haven't really seen too much marketing for this one, nor have I seen too many people talking about it. So I don't know if this is really on anyone's radar or on anyone's list of films to watch. But this one is basically Miles and Anya are on opposite sides of a giant gorge that is being sort of protected by both the western side and the eastern side of countries. So Anya Taylor-Joy plays a Lithuanian military person, and Miles Teller is an American military person. Now, the one rule that they have essentially is that they are not to communicate with each other, which, of course, because of this film, they do not do. They have one job, and they don't do that job. But then they are also supposed to sort of protect the world essentially from anything coming out of the gorge. Now, I will say that I was slightly disappointed with this movie. I did think that it was a heck of a lot of fun. I do recommend anyone watching it if you are interested in it, but I do sort of think that this is one of those throwaway films that potentially all of these actors just do for income, like as a job, and not something that they particularly seek out or are super excited to do, especially with Anya Taylor-Joy in this one. I found that kind of confusing, considering that she's been in some movies that are considerably better than this one, at least in my opinion, lately. And I will say, like, even though the movie is fun, the one thing that I found the most disappointing was once the reveal happens for the creatures or the things that are down inside the gorge that they are meant to be protecting the world from, it very much was reminiscent of like Pirates of the Caribbean, or if anyone has seen Jungle Cruise, like the way that that sort of CGI monster creation was done, which I felt like did not necessarily match the tone of the film. The film itself, even though there is sort of this cutesy romance happening between the two main characters, it is sort of on a more serious note. I would consider this one more of a dark action film than I would something like Jungle Cruise or Pirates, which is more of a lighthearted like comedy action. And I think that the way that they did the CGI for the creatures in this just sort of felt a little bit more on that silly side as opposed to like the serious side of things. I would have liked to see them, I guess, kind of make these creatures look a little bit more realistic, if that makes sense. So something like Annihilation comes to mind in terms of how things could have been done. I don't really necessarily want to say like The Last of Us, because I think that the clickers also kind of look, you know, very CGI and not very realistic. But I think at least in The Last of Us, there is that same tone, that same sort of dark tone there that I think is missing from The Gorge, even though these are creatures that are, you know, evil and essentially trying to harm everyone. I think that the way that they look just didn't come across quite how I expected, if that makes sense. Now, I also would say that there are a lot of maybe plot holes. I don't know if plot holes is the right thing, but a lot of convenient moments, a lot of things that happen to spur the characters and the story on, as opposed to the story just sort of having that happen for itself, if that makes any sense. There are a lot of things where you're like, well, would they really react like that? And something that stands out for me is like at the very beginning of the movie, kind of when the two main characters are sort of initially starting to have some kind of a romance, it's broken into kind of two halves, and there is a battle that ensues between them and the creatures from the gorge. And now any normal human being, because this is meant to be taking place, you know, in current times, it's not set in like a fantasy world or anything like that. It is set in real life. anyone who sees those things come up out of the earth, I feel like would have a very shocked and horrified sort of idea of them. And these two do not seem to have that at all. It's like they're sort of romancing with each other. These creatures start to come up out of the gorge. They fight them off. It's almost like it's breezed over. Like they have no reaction to this sort of happening. And it's just sort of like this meet cute moment. And then they go right back to romancing each other, which I did not think felt realistic at all. I think if somehow that had been changed, like that they had their romance and then at the end of you getting to see their romance is when everything sort of kicks off, that would have made more sense. But I don't know that two military personnel, once they see kind of what is down in the gorge, would then just immediately go back to like, I really want to have dinner with you. You know, at least that would not be my way of perceiving those events. But again, I'm not in that situation. I think for sure also this film had no business being 2 hours long. I think it was over long for what it was. I absolutely think that there were multiple occasions in this film or multiple scenes in this film. The very beginning of the film, maybe the first 10 or 15 minutes of the film, I think were completely useless. It did not lend to the later story in any way, shape, or form. It was just sort of added backstory to the two main characters, which I don't think was really necessary in my opinion. And I think shortening that runtime would have made this movie a lot better. I think at the 1 hour 30 minute mark or 1 hour 40 minute mark would have been perfect for this one. I do not think that it needed to be 2 hours long because I think the first hour is a little bit on the slower side. And then the second hour is the action-packed, like crazy fun that you do get to have. So I think if they had shortened that first half and made it maybe a half an hour and then jumped into all the action and the craziness and all of that sort of stuff, that it would have been a really enjoyable film. Whereas with such a long intro and such a long time to really get going, I felt like that sort of hindered how much joy I got out of the remaining second half of the film, if that makes sense. And I don't really necessarily super love kind of the story of how this went and how this ended, but I did think that it was rather unique. Again, I did think it was worth watching. I thought it was fun. Definitely had some cool moments in it. Anya Taylor-Joy definitely kicks butt in this one, as does her counterpart, but I think she mostly kicks the most butt in this film as opposed to anyone else. I think it was also just slightly disappointing, and this did not affect the movie for me in one direction or the other, but slightly disappointing that Sigourney Weaver also was not in this for very long. I wasn't necessarily expecting her to. The character that she plays isn't one that was like integral to the plot, but she is only in the movie for maybe 10 or so minutes, if that. And I was hoping to see a little bit more of her, even though, again, like I said, doesn't affect the movie at all, and it doesn't affect the plot at all. We are following two completely different characters, but I just love Sigourney Weaver, and so I would like to see more of her in more films. But overall, I would say this one is a fun one to watch. It is a good sort of action romance if you are looking for something like that. Those are really my thoughts on The Gorge. I would love to know what you guys thought of this one if you have seen it. Subscribe to join the Movie Nerd family, and I hope to see you in the next episode.